We're streaming. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this committee meeting, strategic planning. In order to respect everyone's time, we're just going to have a hard stop at 9 o'clock. So I call the meeting to order. In attendance. It is live. Sorry, Billy. I'm getting a lot of text that people can't catch this meeting. Oh, sorry, not Billy. John Mansfield. The meeting is streaming, right?
Yes, it is. It just
okay.
it takes
Maybe
a second.
like a few seconds to, okay.
We were a little late starting,
okay.
So it takes a couple.
All right, so we're just going to call to order. Everyone on this committee got the packet. The first or the only agenda or only topic on the agenda is pocket redistribution, pocket redistricting. Do you want to lead us through that, Susie?
I can, yeah. So the conversation that we really started last year, good morning, Selena. The conversation that we really started last year was what does capacity look like at our middle schools? Really is I believe that that's the problem that we're looking to solve for. And when does it impact the student experience? And so we did last year have Trish Ranieri, who was our principal at ERMS at the time. We had Tim Salem, and I think actually Lisa may have joined us last year as well as long as with Tom. I believe you all have, if you didn't receive from Cheryl, you have from before, our enrollment projections, the low, medium, and high. And so what I'd like to perhaps begin by doing, Tina, before we go too far in, is just maybe for our new board member, Selena, and maybe just even as a reminder for the public that's viewing, talk a little bit about the history, briefly, really, about the history of how we came to the model that we have now, and when the experience does shift and how that connects to the enrollment projections that you all have. So I know, Jen, you're new, so it's probably hard to ask you, so I won't put you on the spot. Or maybe I will just for fun, but I'll start with Tim.
Good morning, everybody. I don't know how far back you want me to go in the history.
Not too far back, but why don't you perhaps bring us from how, the building was constructed, I think, originally for a 40%, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can fast forward to
2016-17 when the study was done by Dr. Baldwin, the superintendent at that time.
Yeah, and obviously at that point, the idea was to go to a 50-50 split, meaning that 3 elementary schools would feed into Scotts Ridge and 3 would fit into East Ridge. And certainly from a parental and community perspective, that would make a lot of sense, right? It's cleaner. I fully understood that. My concern at that time, I voiced it then, clearly, and even up through today, is when Scotts Ridge, in terms of the capacity, at a certain point, it makes it difficult for us to be able to maintain our numbers in terms of class sizes. So I was concerned about the numbers here going up, and did voice that concern as we were going through that process. However, I did understand why the decision was made at that time. There was also some, budget issues that led to that decision, if everybody remembers correctly. And we ended up, the decision was to go to the 50-50 split, which then reduced staffing over a 3-year period at East Ridge. But then obviously, and looking at the projections, the numbers here were steadily rising. And that's kind of where we are now.
So, Tim, the last time we were together, we talked a little bit about the experience at CERMS and when it becomes challenging, let's just say, in terms of the number of students in a classroom. And I think we also talked a little bit about the capacity study and how that perhaps may have impacted the decision at that time to make the shift to CERMS.
Yeah, I mean, I was not thrilled with the capacity study because it didn't take into account the middle school model. They were just looking at the numbers of students that could fit at any given point in time during a day without really understanding the fact that we have a teaming model here at the middle school. And so to be able to maybe simplify it a little bit without getting into the depth of scheduling, the only way that we could accommodate, I think it was over 700 students they had us in terms of being able to fit. Now that's with us already converting teacher workspaces into classrooms. We've already done that, 3 of them. So really, if you come in, and anybody's welcome to do this, if you want to come and take a walk with me and walk around the building of Scotts Ridge, I'll be happy to show you exactly what we've done to create space here. That said, the only way we could ever accommodate over 700 students is if we abolished the middle school teaming model and we went to a traditional junior high model where teachers would not be able to be in their own classroom throughout the day. They would have to bounce to different rooms and kids would not be on teams. And even with that, in terms of your specials classes, your gym, your music, you would need extra teachers in order to staff that with those rising numbers. So that study, I was not a fan of, to be quite honest with you, and we were never consulted. So if somebody had sat down with us and had a conversation about what the actual middle school schedule looks like and how it's constructed and the value of the teaming model, that I'm sure that may have led to different conclusions. But
because without that question of what type of model, instructional model do we use at the middle schools, the way in which you would respond is different. So if you have a team structure, which is what we have, and I think generally speaking, most would argue is best practice within a middle school, structure, you would never be able to sustain the capacity that's described in that study. Right. I think that's what I'm hearing you say, Tim.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I think that all of us would agree that the teaming model is a major asset to both of our middle schools.
So as it stands now, Tim, your student enrollment let's just say at 550, you're able to sustain that number within your current teaming model, right? When does that experience shift?
Yeah, so I think it shifts. So when I think I've told this story, when I first got to Scotts Ridge, our numbers were pretty high. I know Karen Dewing would remember this. And, a lot of the parents, right when I got here, I don't think I was even here for a full summer. And some of the parents were asking about, the classroom numbers and the teacher ratio to student ratio. And so we had to, early on, I think it was after my first year, we did a slight redistricting. And that was, gosh, way back. It's probably 12 years ago or so. And that helped because it created more equitable numbers between East Ridge and Scotts Ridge in terms of that per pupil ratio in classrooms. We were able to get it to about 22, 23 in that range. That made that experience more equitable. But once we eclipse about between 550 and 575, that number, what ends up happening is with our specials classes then begin to get overloaded. So we end up with these points of position. So an extra class here or an extra class there, and then we have to hire or pay teachers overages in order to be able to accommodate those classes. Now, what that also does is it diminishes the teaming model in some aspects because in some cases, there may be extra math classes. And so if we have to have a math teacher in our building teach an extra math class, well, then that doesn't allow that teacher to be able to participate in their team meetings with their team, which is really critical to the teaming model. So that's where I think once we get over 550 to 575, it does start to impact the student experience from that perspective.
Karen, is there anything that you would add to what Tim
just to Tim's point about the pocket redistricting that did happen, just for the sake of anybody listening, before we went to the 50-50 feeder pattern, we had approximately half of the students from Scotland went to East Ridge and about half of them went to Scotts Ridge. And then a small number of Barlow kids ended up going to East Ridge. So since that was already the model in place at the time, the superintendent chose just a neighborhood that was near East Ridge and sent those kids to East Ridge, funneling them out of Scotts Ridge to be able to reduce the capacity and the enrollment numbers at Scotts Ridge. And as Tim said, that was effective, but they were already going with other kids from their schools as well.
Yeah, I think we ended up picking up about, or East Ridge ended up picking up about 30% of, we had 70%. I think they had 30% of the Barlow students with that move.
So if just, Tina, to go back to the enrollment projections that we received in November of this past year. If we looked at, let's say, the middle or the high, hearing what Mr. Salem just shared, we look at, let's just take the medium projections, sorry, not the middle, medium projections, and we look at outward, the range between 560, let's say, and 570 kind of floats between 2024,
Yes.
2025. If you look at the high projections, you're there far sooner. So you're there in 2025, you're at 582.
Yep.
2026, 582. 2027, 577. 28, 585, and then it goes up from there. And in the 2030 year, you're at 608 kids.
Mm-hmm.
If you were using that projection. And so if the goal of the board is to look at ensuring that the team model exists in the way in which a team model is intended to exist at our middle schools, and that the student experience, and then of course, if you look at the enrollment at East Ridge, it's far smaller. And then of course the space is bigger, right? We know that we have the extra space. If the goal is to ensure that the team model exists in the way in which it's intended, then the board is going to have to ask themselves, I guess, two questions. One is whether or not you want to pocket redistrict, or the second question is, do you want to redistrict the entire community in order to balance these schools? And when I say balance, is that back to a 60-40? Is that a 45-55? What is the model that you hope to? And there's also no guarantees, I guess, right? Depending upon the move-ins and the move-outs and all of the like. But I think those are two questions that you're going to have to ask yourself. And then there's a lot of layers that come with that. And it's my understanding historically that I think everything's been done. There's been the elementary redistricting, and then there was pocket redistricting as well. Am I right, Karen?
No, the elementary schools have not been redistricted.
Ever?
No, not since Barlow opened.
Okay.
That was the last time that elementary boundaries were settled. It was which middle school. So it was the middle school that was always the lines moved, not the elementary lines.
Got it.
So if we're, if I may,
Yeah, go.
if we're looking at redistricting in order to solve the potential problem at the middle school with population being relatively flat, slightly going up over the next 10 years, but it's skewing to Scotts Ridge, what would be the benefit of a full redistricting at the elementary school level? Is there a separate benefit that we would get from that?
Yep.
Or if the problem we're trying to solve is a middle school problem, then would we be better served redistricting at that level?
Agree.
Well, I think that's a question for the board in some ways, but at the end of the day is that you have the ability to impact a far greater population by redistricting fully rather than just pocket and identifying. And I think you have to have a demographer as part of this process. It can't obviously be internal. It has to be a demographer, but I would venture to say that you're better off or better suited pocket redistricting rather than impacting a far greater population. And then putting some structures in place to support that population. And there's lots of things on our end that we can do.
Susie, can I just weigh into Jonathan's question?
Please.
Just a consideration for the board. So right now, entire elementary schools feed into their middle school. So all of Scotland, all of Barlow, all of Ridgebury. If you only redistrict the middle school lines, you will go back to having schools split between which middle school they go to, which is just fine. We've done it. So the board needs to make a decision. Do they mind having kids from the same elementary school go to different middle schools? Or is your goal to keep the entire school the same? Because that will determine whether or not you need to redistrict elementary or not.
And is that even a possibility? In other words, Karen, when you're saying feeling comfortable splitting a school, so let's just say as it was done in the past, right, which was Scotland and I think some of Barlow, is there any alternative that would be able to get to 60-40, a 45-55 model without splitting an elementary school?
By redistricting the elementary school, so that those students no longer go to Scotland. They say, for example, they go to VP, and then all of VP feeds into Eastridge. So that's what I'm saying. It depends on your ultimate goal will determine whether or not you need to redistrict elementary.
The
If
conversation.
you don't want to split a school, then they have to change schools.
Then you have you have no choice.
Correct.
Then it's, yeah, so it wasn't this one of the concerns that did come up whenever this capacity study was done, that the fact that Barlow Mountain and some kids from Scotland did not go to the same middle schools as their peers. I know this was brought up at a lot of board meetings and parents, I'm not saying it was the driving force, but whatever the reasons were, but these were concerns that were shared by parents, right? Karen, you were there.
I was a parent who experienced it, so my lens is different because it did not impact my particular family situation. But if there were parents who had concerns about it, you're right. The driving force by Dr. Baldwin was budget.
Yes, I remember. It cut a team at Eastridge, yes.
Over 3 years.
Yes, I remember.
It was 3 teams ultimately.
Three teams.
Three teams,
Yes.
yeah, it was a big budget driver.
And I would imagine that there's no guarantee that if you were to make a shift to Eastridge, that you wouldn't be adding faculty also.
We would have to.
Perhaps it depends on how it plays out, but there is a chance that would happen.
But to Tim's point, right, and if I'm understanding this correct, and being part of the capacity study when it was done originally, Eastridge still has the capacity to add another team. So we can sustain the team model because we go back to that fact that the team model at both the team model is the most successful part of our middle schools. That's what makes these kids thrive. And so if we add kids back to Eastridge, we can still add another team if needed, if the student numbers rise.
Right.
But it's not possible to add that at Scottsridge. Am I right, Tim? Right? Because of the way we are built, just physically how the building is.
And I don't have numbers in front of me, but what I'm thinking about is that if we did redistrict and we had more students at Eastridge, if it wasn't to the extent of adding a full team, then we would be in that limbo area again that Tim was just describing about the specials being at capacity and kind of the FTE, the overages, and that concern that he just described. So I don't have those projection numbers in front of me, but that's just a concern that I'm thinking about.
But Jonathan's question was one that came up in Karen back in 2016. If we were going to do this, it would make at least some sense to consider what it might look like if you went to maybe a 4-2 model where 4 of the smaller elementary schools went to Eastridge and 2 of the larger came to Scott. I mean, we did discuss it, but I think at that point, and Karen just said it, because it was mostly a budgetary consideration at that time. It just wasn't part of the discussion.
In addition, though, Tim, our numbers were too high. It didn't fit.
That's right. That's right. Back at that time, you're right, Karen.
At that time, I can't say now.
Such an incredible memory. Yeah, that's right.
So 4-2 is another option that we hadn't been talking about.
It was
Pocket
one that came
redistricting.
up. It definitely was one that was discussed at that time, Jonathan.
Mhm.
But again, I think Karen has an incredible memory. I think the numbers wouldn't support it, but also because it was primarily a budgetary consideration, and the staffing was reduced at Eastridge, it wasn't one that gained any momentum or a real look into.
Because the
Right,
driving,
because feeding just say Ridgebury and Barlow to Scotts Ridge and feeding Scotland to Eastridge, it made Scotts Ridge a little too small and it made Eastridge a little too big. It wasn't, that's why they had to split it.
Yeah, it wasn't just the perfect numbers that were lining up, right?
Correct.
No, it required, again, it would require
The
some
elementary.
pocket maneuvering at the elementary level rather than doing it at the middle. That was sort of the conversation. Would it make more sense perhaps to look at those lines at the elementary, because then you're still making it clean in terms of 2 schools filling directly to one middle school, 4 to another, but now you don't have to have kids split when they're leaving elementary school. But again, because of at that particular time, the goal was more budgetary in nature, it didn't become a focal point of the discussion.
I think you also have to really recognize impact and how many families are impacted. You're going to impact some. There's no doubt that you're going to impact some. But redistricting at the elementary level is complicated. It brings out a lot of emotion, and it impacts your entire population, or could impact your entire population. So, I think you have to think carefully about ultimately what it actually solves for, and if it solves exactly what you need. That's a big question. And how, the capacity of our schools to sustain that as well, depending upon the school.
Yeah, one of the questions that I tried to ask back, and so nobody else was in this discussion then, back in 2016 was, we should really be looking at the numbers beyond just this year before we make this decision. Karen remembers this. This is just 1 year. If we're looking at the numbers that follow, at this moment in time, is this really the best? And again, I completely, if you're looking at this purely from a parental perspective, it does make a lot of sense. You have 3 feeding into one and 3 feeding into another. But if you're not really knowledgeable or really understand the spacing issues and the scheduling components, then it's hard to really understand the impact.
if we're looking to reduce the possible impact, just looking at the projections, middle school overall, looks like the projections are relatively flat, slightly up over the next 10 years. The issue is just, we need 100 fewer at Scotts Ridge and 100 more at East Ridge, which probably isn't an additional team as much as it's just gently moving a small portion of the population over to solve that problem.
Yes, Selena.
So since it is your sandbox, Tim, what's just your gut? Like if you had to decide today what the solution was to this issue, because my kids went to Scotland and Scotland was split and then we moved. So I had twins at Eastridge.
And you had Gracie here with us.
I had Gracie there.
Yep.
So forget about the politics, just in your gut, what's the solution today?
Look, we've done it before. So it's not as though Scotts Ridge hasn't had those type of numbers. We've done it, but not without consternation, only because, so it's just a matter of what ends up happening is that you're going to have somebody, and I'm not sure which team, because it depends on the numbers by grade level and which math classes may be impacted. But what ends up happening is you'll have students on one team that may not necessarily have the math teacher on that team. They may have a math teacher from a different team. The result of that also is the students and the families that have the math teacher that has to teach off team are not going to benefit from that teacher being able to participate in team meetings, those types, because that's the period that they'll be teaching off team. So, and then on top of that, you're going to have your specials teachers, your music teachers, your gym teachers, your world language teachers. Most of those classes will rise in terms of those numbers. So once you eclipse, say 27 or 28, you have to split those classes. And so now we'll have to have teachers teaching above their contract. So, a 1.0 would be a full contract. They'll be teaching above that. What makes that tricky is scheduling that, because then you have to figure, okay, they're teaching above it. Now, where are they going to teach that class? Where are we finding the space to do that? When those numbers get to that point, it's not that we can't do it. It's just that it does come with some consternation, and there's some offsets in that some teams will be impacted as a result. So that's just the fair and honest answer, so that people can, it's not that we can't, we can, it's just that it will have some reverberations, and I can't predict where, because I don't know where those numbers will fall yet.
Tim, are you impacted that way right now? Is your enrollment at about 520 around there?
Yeah, I think we're at 526 if I remember correctly. Not as much. I mean, we have some math classes that are a little bit crowded at 26, 27. But we don't have anybody right now, any of our teachers teaching outside of their team. Right now, everybody's able to teach on their team, and that model and structure is sacred at the moment.
At 526.
Yep.
But even with that number, that's the way it fell with registration with math.
Yeah.
Right.
That you can have that same number, but if more kids are in one level of math than the other, that's what tips it.
It does.
It's not the
That's
total
right.
enrollment.
Yeah.
In
And
that
so-
number, let's just say in math, Tim,
Hmm?
26 kids, 27 kids, like when do you say?
We don't like to go past 27. We really, even at 27, it's tight. I think 27 is what the contract reads is Karen would know better. I think it's 27.
Yeah. I mean, they're guidelines. So,
They're guidelines, right? But once you get past that, and it's amazing if you're a teacher, right, and you're looking at 23 kids versus 27. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but physically, when you're walking into a classroom and looking at those, it's a packed room. It really is. So it does make a bit of a difference in terms of that. So.
And oh, sorry, Celine. I was just going to give
So
Ken.
ideally, you want to keep the classrooms at 24. I'm just I want to know.
That is
Again,
ideal.
you're the
Sophia.
expert here, so I want to make sure I'm hearing everything correctly. So ideally, you want the classrooms at 24 because you think that's the best situation for middle school students, correct?
Yes, I think, yes, 24, 22, 23, 24. That's
Okay.
Jen, would you agree with that? I think those are.
Yes, and actually, so Tim, I'm thinking about if we move forward with pocket redistricting, we're projected to have about 480 students next year. And so if we had students come our way, we would want to keep our enrollment around that number as well, so that we don't have to fall into the same situation that you're sharing right now. So teachers can teach on teams. We're not having out of team, off team courses. So that would be, you said in the beginning, you said about 550 to 580 would be the breaking point for that.
Yeah, once we start to hit, so when I first got to Scotts Ridge, I think we were already at 575. We were up there. But I walked into living that experience. We were already having teachers teaching outside of the team. Our numbers were real, and that's what led to that slight pocket redistricting after my first year. So we did it. It wasn't as though we couldn't do it. We did it. It just does have some impact on some teams, not every team, but some teams.
but Tim, remember back then, we did not have the same specialized programs that you have now. So, your RISE programs and things did not exist
That's
in your
true.
building
We
that
didn't
took
have
space
RISE.
at that time. Mhm.
That's right, Karen. You're right. We didn't have the RISE program at that time. That's true. We've added some programming since that period.
So it's not real. And when you were at 570, when you got there, Tim, was not when you were still a 60-40. So 40% of the population was still 570.
Yeah, that's right. We were still we hadn't done the redistricting at that point.
Because,
Pocket.
so what prevents, let's just say, like, Jonathan, I know you said the enrollment, runs flat, right? But let's just say we had a huge increase in enrollment. What's to say that you're not going to get at 570 or 600 anyway at the 40%, right? At the 40%, or does that, am I making sense? Or like, who's to say that that's not going to happen regardless? If we had a high number, like, do we just continue to shift over to ERMs because they had the capacity?
I think, that's why we do 10-year projections and monitor that every year so that we can gauge and plan. But right now the projections don't identify that, but certainly that's
The high
a
do,
possibility.
the high do, not the medium, but the high get,
Right, but that modeling is done on 50-50 right now.
Yes,
right, good point, right.
Yep. That's fair. Yep. Ken, did you have a question?
I don't.
Okay.
I just hope that whoever made the decision to build the school at 40% capacity is having a bad coffee day. Because those decisions have trickled down and have made life very difficult.
Well, I mean, there's other elements of the school. When you think about the auditorium, which just fits, I think, about half of the school. Am I right, Tim?
Yeah, every time we'd have to do a special presentation, we have to do it twice because we can only fit half the school. So, but we're used to that. We've created special schedules, so that's not an issue. We've circumvented that. The only thing I think that the public needs to be aware of, and if I'm a parent listening in and I want to sort of think about what this could look like for my child, the thing to consider, it's not that we can't accommodate that number, we can, but there's going to be impact somewhere. It's just hard to predict where. It depends on how the numbers meet out in terms of who's taking which math classes, then that determines which teams may be impacted with those larger numbers. And then from just the scheduling standpoint, again, we can do it. It just makes it really, really tricky when you have teachers having to teach above their contract.
The other piece that I'm not sure that, from a parent perspective, I'm not sure that it's one that you can always plan for, but the average class size is different, right? You can see that in your budget book when you look at the average class size at ERMS, let's say at 16, and at Scotchford's perhaps at 19 or 20 or 21, depending. So there is that element. You can't control that. You can't control that at the elementary level either. But it is a reality when a school is smaller than the other.
And that's what, ironically enough, that's what led to the original redistricting 12 years ago, Susie, was that exact reason, where the class sizes were out of skew.
And so if you were to go with pocket redistricting, let's just say, and you were to go back to the original boundaries that you had, Karen, am I correct in saying that that would be a split at Scotland and a possibility for Barlow?
Yes, that's the way it was, but definitely Scotland, just because of their boundaries are the ones that border the boundary to Eastridge.
It's that, or move the kind of the middle school line up. Put some of the Scotland population into Veterans Park,
Yes.
some of the Barlow into Farmingville. Both of those have capacity. That's just a greater
You mean
level of
It's more work. It's a lot more. Yeah, there's a lot more.
Well, not work for us, work for the parents, I'm thinking.
And
Yeah.
everybody, because I think you really have to look closely at those lines. There's a lot more, that's more tedious, again, because it hasn't been done. At least in the former model, that's been done before. So it makes it somewhat easier because there's experience with it. We know where those lines were originally. I think it does make it, and Susie made a good point too earlier. It's harder at the elementary level. Now you're changing, you're telling, for real estate, you're telling people you're going to be in this school. Now you're changing that. So there are a lot of levels and layers to it for certainly.
You've got parents that say, I bought my house
We go to
Yeah,
Here
to go to
deposits
this-
in such and such school's
Yeah.
district.
Yep. And we've had that. I've had parents call me up. I thought my kid was coming to this school and now they're, now they're not.
And then they're impacted almost double, right? Because they could be impacted. They thought they were going up to a particular middle school, which may be disheartening for that reason. But on top of it all, they thought they were going to a particular elementary school, and now that
But
changes.
Also philosophically, are we going to make the child, that family move immediately? So when we did the 50-50, if that family had an 8th grader and a 7th grader at Eastridge, we let them finish out their middle school experience. We didn't make them go to Scotts Ridge.
Right. you
So
guys have
for a
transportation.
2-year period, we had double transportation,
Yeah.
double everything to let that happen. So the board would need to make a decision if they redistricted elementary school. Are you going to just say, I'm sorry, you started 1st grade at Scotland, but you're going to 2nd grade at VP? Or if you don't want to do that and you want to transition like we did the middle school, then you have a 5-year period of transition and double busing. So there's other variables that would need to be considered.
Right. Because even as it stands now, let's just say we pocket redistricted, you would likely have to have a period in time when you would have double transportation, right? Some kids going to one and some kids going to the other, depending upon what the family choice was. But in what we just described, as Karen just pointed out, you'd be doing that perhaps for a number of years if you offered that family that opportunity to stay within the school.
And the other thing that does too, Karen just reminded me, is it then really ties the middle schools together, because if you have some parents that just choose to make the move and others who don't, well, now you have to make sure that your open houses are on different nights, because you have to accommodate those parents who may be shifting between schools. So there's also those mitigating factors that make it more complicated as well.
I guess we go back to the question, what are we trying to solve here, right, Susie? I mean, that's what we have to all talk about. But I know, Tim, you mentioned that many times, the capacity or the student capacity currently at Scotts Ridge does play into their experience at school. I know COVID brought it home too, right? I know there was problems, distancing and everything. So God forbid we never have a pandemic again. But it's just, these are realities of life too. And to Susie's point, I think as a board, we would need to discuss, is this something we want to talk about and take further? Because it will impact, at the end of the day, either ways it is impacting, right? I mean, if the class sizes are larger than Eastridge comparatively, their experience at Scotts Ridge is slightly different from the experience. And I'm not saying it always has to be equitable and everything, but it's just a fact that it is happening at this time simply because of the way the physical capacity of Scotts Ridge. That's just fact. Yes, emotions, I can totally see people are going to get upset by this, but I think we go back to the board and talk about this. Is it pocket redistricting? And I think Karen said it, the lines are already drawn. It might be simpler, or we do talk about it holistically from an elementary point. And of course, it will impact everybody, because I can tell you right now, there are parents who buy houses for a certain elementary school. So that is a whole town impact, for lack of a better word. All 6 elementaries will get influenced. And if I'm hearing correctly, it does have budget implications no matter what we do.
Or it may,
Or it may, if we do.
I don't know, right?
Yeah, it may have
Well, there'll be some, whether it's busing, there'll be something.
something.
For sure.
I do have a question about that. There are some, I have heard people say that they believe that there would be a cost savings from redistricting, occasional redistricting at the elementary level. Do you have any, I don't, from my perspective, I don't see where that savings would come from unless we were able to close a whole elementary school, which we can't, or if we had an elementary school that was over capacity, which we don't. So do you know of what kind of cost savings could possibly come from a redistricting at the elementary school?
You brought up the 2 reasons that you would think that you would save money, right? That you could compact an elementary school with other students and be able to close an elementary school, which you can't do. One of the capacity studies that Tina shared was very helpful, because it talked about it showed the old model of a school and the new model of a school, and how instruction has evolved over time, right? You're not sitting in rows in classrooms. You're sitting, there's collaborative work. Many of these rooms are used for specialized instruction that were not used in that same way 20 years ago. So the way in which we teach and the way in which our children learn is different. So the idea that we could possibly close a school, that's unless you're planning on looking at one of the schools, and the only school that I understand could even be expanded on, and that would be a stretch, would be Barlow Mountain. And so you would be potentially closing a school to expand into Barlow Mountain, and then you'd save possibly some money there. I don't think anyone, at least that I've heard in this community, has an appetite for that. But even if it was feasible, so I don't think that that's a reality. At least not right now. Now, the potential of perhaps building a new school and closing one down, that's always there, but not with the model that we currently have.
Yeah, that capacity study that from 2016-17 had a number of considerations. They looked at perhaps splitting the middle schools into a 5-6 school and one being a 7-8 school. There were a ton of different
There were 6 scenarios.
considerations, I remember.
Yeah, and educationally, most of them were a bad idea.
Yep.
I thought so. Well, just because, the numbers just didn't make a lot of sense, and then you start to think about kids' travel time from one side to have to go to one. There was a lot of things that just, I don't know, it just didn't seem to make a lot of. There was one I think that had a. Karen, correct me if I'm wrong. One of them was like an 8-9 they had
Yep.
too, I think. Is that right, Tina? I remember.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. And that I didn't think that was a good idea at all. But
Because it took away the 5-8 was the team model and the way it worked, and then there was the 2. But I remember Eastridge was considered as 8-9, and Scottsridge was the younger grades, and then all the kids that were going to be bused from Ridgebury area, let's say, all the way to Eastridge, added bus times. I remember those were scenarios. I know that in the packet the capacity study from 2016-17, one of the scenarios is talking about if an elementary were to close, and it actually says it will if Scotland were to close, the remaining PK to 5 schools would operate at 90% utilization. This is at that time when we already know enrollment and projections have changed. I mean, I did look at the projections in 2016-17. Even now we're higher. So not a lot, but slightly higher. So we can't really predict that and close a school. I think this is where I have to go back and keep saying it's not possible to save money anyway.
The other piece that I think even since 16-17 has evolved is the way in which our classrooms are structured, whether that's the library media center, the maker space, you're using rooms for specialized instruction, OT, PT has expanded itself, right? As you bring in programs or try to keep programs in district, you're using those spaces. That's one of the challenges that I know Principal Salem has expressed in his school as he's had to expand in a variety of ways, is he's lost spaces that they intended when they built that school to be utilized in different ways. And so I think that that's something that's just even generally speaking with the budget is, someone might look at how enrollment has changed over the past 10 years. Why isn't our budget going down? Because education has changed over the past 10 years. Whether that's, things that don't impact classrooms like security and things like that, or just the way in which we instruct and unfunded mandates and SRBI or MTSS as we call it, all of those things, those are classroom spaces now.
that's a great point, because that specialization, as and Karen said it earlier, it has created, at least here anyway, we've had to convert spaces. We have 3 teacher workrooms that are now converted into student spaces as a result of that.
No, so I too, to Tim's earlier point, feel that capacity study overinflated the capacity of our schools. Yeah, for example, saying 700 at Scotts Ridge. So when you just said if we close the school, the others would be functioning at 90% of capacity. I actually don't believe that would be accurate, because I think the capacity is overinflated and that we couldn't fit, because basically what they did, and the same thing for Scotts Ridge, is they counted every single classroom and times by 25. Our class size for kindergarten and first grade is maximum 21. It's 24. So you can't, like, even just the simple math, they overinflated the number of students per room. And then, to Susie's point, took every single room, whether it was a teacher room, a literacy intervention room, a special education room. So
we can't function that way. So
No.
to answer your question, a long way to get there, Jonathan, but it's not, again, could you take maybe Barlow Mountain and remodel, and perhaps, I still don't think you're going to be able to close a building. Think about the number of classrooms that are in a school, even in your smallest school, 13, 14, that's just classroom spaces. That's not to mention anything else. Or you build a whole other school that has greater capacity, and you have a supersized elementary school perhaps. But outside of that, maybe not, maybe it wouldn't be supersized, but it'd be on the larger side.
Susie, I think that was mentioned. Karen, correct me if I'm wrong. There was an idea mention of that too,
For
right?
Barlow?
Combining, yes, Barlow Mountain and Scotland, and making a one elementary. But again, the parking, the busing, everything came into play. And then they were going to be, correct me if I'm wrong, Lorraine, but they were going to be in a different tier because of the busing and then the whole equity of how that works versus, so it was not really solving for anything.
No, but there also was, and we did use the time, supersized Barlow was taking over the child care center at Barlow to gain some classroom space. But that, I believe, and Joe Moritz would know better than I think it only gave us maybe 6 or 7 classrooms.
I want to
And
say
as
less than
Susie
that.
said,
Yeah.
it might even be less than that. And that, so to Susie's point, even closing our smallest elementary school, it wouldn't give us enough space that we would need to house.
And it also
students.
mentioned in the capacity study at that time, and I was actually, thank you for answering. One of my questions was, is the capacity study truly representing capacity at a school? So, because
That's
it
my
was not,
personal
because,
belief.
but no, because that's something, when you look at this packet, right, and they say 90% capacity or 60%, it's a valid question. And so when we're looking at it, we have to understand that it's not true representation, because the way we educate and the way our classrooms are structured and the fact that Scottsridge is a RISE school, it just changes everything.
So what they did well there is they did show the evolution of a classroom from before to now. But to what Karen communicated is that what they looked at was the number of classrooms. They multiply it by a max number of kids, which isn't reality. They also didn't spend time with, from what I understand, I'm supposing, but they didn't spend time with leadership to help understand contextually how our schools actually operationalize day to day. So, you could take this building and count the number of rooms and perhaps identify how many people are here. But if you operationally don't know how this building functions, you can't really make predictions on the future. And I think that perhaps was one area that could have been better captured, let's just say.
So
I think the other, sorry, Tina.
No, so the principals were not consulted during the study at all. Did I hear that correctly?
I know that the middle school was not, from what I understand.
Who was responsible for that? That seems like just gross oversight or undersight.
The one other piece that I was going to add is that, anytime, whether you redistrict as a whole or you pocket redistrict, there's emotion there. It's natural. I went to school with my 5th grade classmates or my 3rd grade classmates, my 4th grade classmates. That's who I want to go to middle school with. For some families and kids, that's emotional. For others, it may not be, right? Karen said she's one example of what she experienced. Her experience was just fine. Maybe for others, more vulnerable populations or just first-time families, whatever the case may be, that is an emotional time for them. Certainly it would be on a larger scale if we redistricted 6 schools, but it's still going to be that way, even if you pocket redistrict. And so the one thing that I think we can do really well on our side, if that is the way in which the board ends up going, or the direction in which the Board of Education ends up going, we can create or build a support system for kids. We'll find opportunities across years. If we can project out and we know when this is going to begin, we can create structure so kids can integrate, even though they do with athletics and extracurriculars. We know that in this community, but we'll find very structured ways in which we can do that to support kids along that continuum. For some kids, quite frankly, it's a great opportunity, right? Because to build expand their friendship group or their social group isn't always a bad thing. So for some kids, it's harder. And for some kids, it's probably an opportunity that they didn't see coming. But we certainly would find opportunities to create structures to support them along the way, if that's the way in which the board ends up. Another suggestion for Tina and Jonathan is that if we do bring this to the full board, it might be helpful for Jen and Tim to help the Board of Education and the public understand the team model first, and how, number of students does impact or has the ability to influence how that team model operationalizes day to day. And what gets shifted when the capacity is too high or when we haven't added a team.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Selena, I think where it went a little bit wrong in the initial one was we were consulted. We had a conversation after the study had been completed, and we were looking at the numbers. What we didn't do at the outset was to sit with, I forget the group's name, but I think was it Malone and I can't remember.
Yeah.
We didn't sit with them in advance to actually go over what the middle school model looks like, how students change classes, the ramifications of the teaming model. Like, we didn't discuss that in advance. It wasn't until after the study when we said that wouldn't work, and here's why. So I agree with Dr. De Silva. If there is going to be conversations about, any kind of maneuvering, I think we could be helpful in just being able to explain what the ancillary effects of any movements might have at the middle school.
100%, 100%.
As old as I am, I was hoping this would happen after I was gone, but as fate would have it.
Me too.
We're going to keep you as long as we can,
I knew we were coming back to this conversation back in 2000, just for the record. I said it. We're coming back to it.
I said it to you. I remember Margaret and I have been talking to you about this for years. I was at Scottsridge when this conversation started. I think it was at Ridgebury, and we were just going to start Scottsridge. And these conversations were happening. And you talked about the concept. You talked about your concerns. I think you did publicly share them too.
I did, absolutely, because I didn't want, especially with our own PTA, because of course, our PTA was concerned, and right from the outset, I just wanted to be transparent in terms of what I understood to be the ramifications of going to the 50-50. And again, I know how excited from a parent perspective that was, because it's cleaner, but if you're not living this every day, you're not understanding the impact. So that's all right. We'll figure it out. No worries.
And the other point though, Tina, that I think, an assessment of the projections and which model we're going to, because when you look at the medium model, the impact isn't quite as significant, right? If you look at that high model, it is. And that can help you determine when when an implementation plan or a phase-in plan would need to happen. I think that's another piece.
You're right. I think because we're almost at 9 o'clock, and to respect everyone's time, I think we need to bring this back to the board, Jonathan. I think, and we do, I completely agree. We do need, because we do have new board members who have not actually even gone through middle school. We do need them, or maybe a revision to understand what the team model looks, and for community, because there are we have so many new parents moving in. There are so many kindergartners, first graders parents who are probably watching this and thinking, oh God, what decisions are they making? So I think we do have to explain what the team model and why it is so needed. I completely appreciate and understand the value of it. I know the difference it makes and helps prepare the kids for RHS and the success these kids have. So I think we should bring it back to the full board. We should talk about it. And we should see what direction the board can take. And I do think, Susie, the 2 points, we should share the capacity study with the board, the old capacity study, with the caveat that the way capacity was done is not exactly 100% capacity. Because the scenarios there are many scenarios in that. All the ideas that people are having are listed in that. And it even associates costs at that time. I think I just read one, if they close a children's corner, and if you have to additionally open it, how much more money it costs. I think all these are real budget implications. And we just need to they're already done. The study's already there. This is where we share with the board and then see where direction the board takes us. That makes sense?
Tina?
Yes, Ken.
My interpretation, and again, I could be wrong, is the purpose of the committee is for us to look at, okay, if we do this scenario, if we go back to the 40-60 split, if we do a pocket redistricting, that's what this looks like. If we do all of the elementary school redistricting, that's what this looks like. If we do some other option C, that's what this looks like, and that's what we bring to the board. I thought that was always the purpose of the committee, because we can have a big general discussion. And I'm not saying we shouldn't share these things with the board. Maybe a presentation on the team model would be good for the full board at this point. But I thought the role of the committee was to flesh out the scenarios and bring solutions to the board that the board would then discuss and choose one or the other, or a hybrid.
That I agree.
Recommendation.
Because really what we're doing, what I'm hearing right now is that we're just going to literally have the same discussion we had today, but with the full board.
No, I was going to bring just pocket redistricting to the board.
But maybe the better option is to do a complete redistricting. We don't know, because we haven't explored it fully as a committee yet.
So, but that would, Susie, correct me if I'm wrong, that would require a complete new study, right?
Yes, in other words, in order to do that, I think you would want to have board support about spending, you're going to have a study, a demographer involved in pocket redistricting as well. But if you're going to go down another road, which is to redistrict the entire community, you would have to have a demographer engaged in that study and give you that information, unless you're going to use the old data.
Right. Well, so what I would think is so then take it from, all right, pocket districting. If we do a pocket redistricting, this is what it's going to look like. This school would go here, or this neighborhood would go here. This neighborhood would go here. It would be a cost increase or cost savings of this. This is what this new school would look like. We can have another general discussion at the board meeting, but we haven't really established what pocket redistricting would look like. We've done it at a high level, and yes, we've done it before, but I think that a lot of community members weren't here and know it before, and I know the vast majority of the board, or a majority of the board, hasn't seen what that looked like, or at least some members of it. I think it would just be more productive if we came with something more solid to the full board, rather than have another high-level discussion at the board. We've had lots of those over the years. Just the 2 years I've been here.
Maybe the first thing for your committee to do is just think about what are your actual options, right?
Yes.
Just first to think about what are the options as we stand right now, so that way you as a committee have those sort of in some semblance of order of, here are the options that we're going to be thinking about before you bring them back to the full board. Because certainly, as we said, could we, if you're asking me, and I'm being completely honest, can we get through that period at, I forget what year it is it 26, 27? I can't remember the apex of that 576, but could we do that? The answer is yes. There will be some ramifications in terms of what the model looks like. But I just think maybe as a board, or as a committee, first you think about, okay, do we not do anything and try to, or do we consider going back to what Susie talked about, or do we consider, at least then before you do anything else, you've got those options sort of in front of everybody.
Yep.
So
exactly.
Just a humble suggestion.
So what do we do? I think to Ken's point, let's have another committee meeting in 2 weeks, and we can have Malone and whoever did this, talk about this, because Malone and McBroom come and talk about this. so that we have an understanding of what 60-40 would look, what pocket redistricting would look, what we're talking about enrollment numbers and how that would look logistically, right, Ken? That's what you're meaning, right? What parts?
I think what I was hearing today is we already have a good idea of what the pocket redistricting would look like. I mean, we can use the numbers we have, draw the same lines that we had prior, and then what does that look like for us? I mean, so we don't even need to have a consultant come in. I don't think, just from if that's not an easy a lift as I'm thinking it is. But we already know, if we just use the current numbers and lay over what the other, back when we had when we had the split, we know what the lines were then, let's put those same lines, overlay that onto the data we have now. And that will give us information, whether it's enough to action or not, then, that's a different thing. But I don't know that we would need to engage anyone else. I wouldn't think.
The action you're looking for is a recommendation from this committee. And I don't know if we're at the point today where we can vote on as a committee what the recommendation would be, or if we should meet 2 weeks from now.
No, absolutely not.
Flesh
We
that
don't
out.
know. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing it because I don't know what that looks like. I mean, holistically, I understand it from a high level, but until we actually say, it would affect, 52 families. Obviously we're not going to know exactly, what grades those kids are in or any of that information, but we can say, okay, it's going to be about this many kids, which is going to be about this many families. And I think without doing a whole lot of work, I think we could get that information. We have all the data.
So maybe the best option right now is so that we meet in 2 weeks and we do bring this to us, to a committee, so that we can take it to the full board. And we do talk about the capacity studies already done. We already knew where the old lines were. If we draw them back, what amount of kids go to Eastridge? And how many kids go to Scottsridge, and to Ken's point, how many families are affected either at Barlow Mountain or at Scotland?
And Tina, shouldn't we also talk about, are the kids who are in those neighborhoods now, are they going to stay at the school they're at? And what that looks like, cost wise, right? Because if we're redrawing lines, there'll be some kids in those houses or whatever who are at Scottsridge who might later go to Eastridge. Do we keep them at Eastridge, like Susie said? And is there going to be a cost to the transportation? So could we do that also? Could we maybe get those numbers before our next meeting? Just, there'll be arbitrary numbers probably, but maybe just, an approximate. Is that possible, Susie?
I'm actually, so Selena, your question and Ken's, I'm not sure how possible that is, quite frankly, in 2 weeks. I don't know that that's an easy task without a demographer. It's not just, I don't think it's quite that simple, but honestly, I need to get my head around figuring that part out alongside my colleagues and perhaps even Billy. I don't know. I'd have to just get my head around it. But either way, it sounds like this committee wants to come back together to at least discuss before going back to the board, which is fine. Makes sense to do so. I don't think there's a 911 and moving forward too quick without having all of the information. If there's still underlying questions, I'm just not sure if I can have that information for you in 2 weeks without the support of somebody else. But let me give that some thought and see if internally there's something we can do.
Okay. We maybe could just get the map then that they had before, if nothing else.
Susie, to respect everyone's time and the fact that you do have a million other things to do, why don't you come back to us and let us know when you as a group could get this information? If you rather just keep our next meeting date, that's okay too. I don't want to add too much. I mean, we've started the conversation. To Ken's point, let's make a decision at the next, or hopefully come to some kind of decision at the next one once we have some raw numbers. But I don't want to put all this, you have so much other stuff to do.
Well, I want to be cautious of what we're actually able to do in order to provide accurate information. So Tina, I can connect with you and let you know where where we are, and then that will help set the agenda forward. It sounds like either way, the committee wants to come back together to process it a little bit more. And if we feel like it's important to have Malone and McBroom here to discuss it, then we'll do that also.
Sometimes it helps having, somebody just give a presentation to.
Actually, not Malone McBroom anymore. I think it's Slam, but Slam.
Yes. I mean, it says Slam on that too. So I was kind of confused.
It's Slam now. So they switched over. Yeah.
Okay.
They switched over.
Yeah, that's easier to say, but yeah. Okay. So because it's there, I mean, they even have charts and maps that showed where they picked out kids from. So maybe that's something we can talk about. So we can connect after this and see. But I know if I'm hearing everyone correctly, or we would like to bring this back to committee before we go to the board. Is that fair, Ken?
I think that we don't have a recommendation for the board, so we would essentially be discussing what we discussed today with the full board, and not really have any recommendation on the way to go forward.
Well, I think
then we'd be meeting after that meeting and having the meeting that I think we should have next. But it would
so I think what you're saying, Ken, is in order to make a recommendation, you feel like you need more information to be able to provide contextually what the impact is for redistricting everybody as a whole, pluses and minuses. And
I think at this point, I don't think we have that data, and to get that data, we would need to engage someone. I feel that we already have the data where we could see the potential impact or a range of impact for pocket redistricting. I think we have that information. So if we look at it and as a committee, we think, you know what, that actually seems like that would be doable. Let's discuss that with the board. Or if we don't think it's doable, we would present it to the board and say, this is what this would cost, or this is what the impact would be if we don't think that this is going to be effective or this is the best move. We think we should consider full redistricting, and this is what that's going to cost because we have to get a new survey done. We have to do X, Y, and Z. But we can't get to that point without looking at pocket redistricting first. So maybe that is the right answer. We have data in order to at least make an educated assessment of it. And then if that looks like that might work, then we can go down to that and maybe make that a recommendation, like go down that road and maybe make that as a recommendation. But if we go down that road a little bit and we go like, ooh, that's really not going to work, we really should do a look at full redistricting. Then we can bring that to the board because that's going to have costs, and we're going to have to, as a board, approve those additional expenses.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yep. So, all right, let's come back. I'll connect with Susie and Jonathan, and we'll come back and we will just talk about the options, just data, nothing else, no discussion. And we can decide if this is something that is viable. And if we support it, we bring it back to the board, to your point, Ken. Does that seem okay? Selena, Jonathan? Okay.
Yes, sooner, not.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So as we will,
Definitely
we'll connect. Yeah, we'll connect with Susie after this. We'll try to bring it back to the committee as fast as possible. And we can then discuss quickly and make a decision either ways, and then bring it to the board. And then as a board, we can discuss large groups. All right, it is 9:09, and I want to really respect, I said a hard stop at 9. But okay, thank you so much, everyone. I'll update the committee once I get in touch. Me and Susie and Jonathan.
Everyone.
All right. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice to meet you, Billy. Have a good one. The meeting is adjourned.